Hey there, I'm Adam Rex, and I want to thank the Houston Public Library for hosting this broadcast. I'm going to be talking a little bit about myself and answering questions if you guys have any. I don't really know what you're going to want to talk about today. I've written 3 novels, as well as a bunch of picture books, but um, I've written 3 novels, the first of which was The True Meaning of Smekday, which there's the paperback right there. Um, Also, for teens and adults, Fat Vampire. And my most recent is the start of a new middle grade trilogy that I'm writing, and is called Cold Cereal, and it's book 1 of the Cold Cereal saga. I wanted to call it the Cold Cereal serial, but my publisher wouldn't let me. I understand that some of you might be seeing an advertisement or something before I get started, so hopefully that's over now. Was it good? I wonder what it was about. Probably car insurance, right? It seems like all the ads that I see nowadays are for either car insurance or Axe body spray. I don't want to give the impression that I'm buzz marketing Axe body spray. I think it makes you smell like a shoe. But that seems to be like all the ads that I see now. So let's see. The True Meaning of Smekday is it's a book for like people 9 and up. It's about an alien invasion, and it's also sort of a buddy comedy between a girl and an alien named J-Lo who go on a road trip across America to try to find the girl's mom. And I guess this is as good a time as any to say that this is actually going to be a motion picture. It's going to be an animated film by DreamWorks in 2014, which is frustratingly far away, but I'm very excited about it. I've been out there a couple of times to see what they're up to, and they seem like really great people there. It's going to be called Happy Smekday. They changed the title for their own reasons. But if you have any questions about that, then of course feel free to ask them when I start taking questions. My next novel after that was Fat Vampire, which was more for teens and adults, and is a very different kind of book. When I finished The True Meaning of Smekday, I wanted to do something completely different. So Fat Vampire is about this kid named Doug. He's 15. He is exactly the sort of person that never gets turned into a vampire in any of the other stories. He's short, he's a little overweight, he's kind of pimply, kind of a social outcast, and he gets accidentally turned into a vampire. And then he has to decide what sort of person he's going to be for the rest of eternity because of that. And then I'll talk a bit more about Cold Cereal. This is my new one. It is, I'm really proud of it. It's, as I said before, the start of a new trilogy. The second book in the trilogy is going to be called Unlucky Charms, and that'll be out in February, I think. So Cold Cereal is about this kid named Scott who sees things that other people don't see, like mermaids in the community pool and unicorns and stuff like that. And he gets these migraine headaches, so he's under the impression that these things that he sees are just auras. This is a real thing that some migraine sufferers get. I get migraines myself, although I don't get auras. But auras are, it's like when a migraine sufferer starts to hallucinate things right before they get a headache. They might see flashing lights or wavy lines or whatever. And so he thinks that the weird stuff he sees are just these kind of hallucinations. But then one of the hallucinations tries to steal his backpack. So the story proceeds from there. The story kind of came out of the fact that when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to have sugar cereals. Do people still call them that, sugar cereals? I guess I'm not sure about that. I mean like Unlucky Charms, or Lucky Charms rather, and Trix and Cap'n Crunch and stuff like that. I didn't get to have those when I was a kid. There was actually a cereal when I was a kid called Super Sugar Crisp. Can you imagine? Super Sugar Crisp. I don't think they would ever call a cereal that now, because nowadays they want to try to trick you into thinking that their cereals are really wholesome and good for you and full of vitamins and so forth. But yeah, Super Sugar Crisp. They might as well have called it Super Fatty Lumps. But anyway, I wasn't allowed to have these cereals. My mom bought me the following 3 cereals: wheat checks, granola, and muesli. For those of you who don't know, muesli is the cereal that they invented in Switzerland. And I've never been to Switzerland, but based on how I thought the cereal tasted when I was a kid, I'm going to go ahead and guess that muesli is Swiss for sawdust and hay. It's like they swept out the floor of a barn and put it in a box and sold it to my mom. So that's what I had to deal with when I was a kid, and I think because of that I was sort of obsessed with sugar cereals and their cartoon mascots and the commercials on TV for them. So I think that's the reason why, years later I started writing this story about an evil breakfast cereal company, that is running a secret experiment on a pair of siblings. And yet that story kind of didn't really go anywhere at first. I didn't really know what it was about. So I worked on it for a while, but eventually I shelved it because, frankly, nobody writes anything the right way the first time. The first draft always stinks. So I had to put it away so that I could take it out again later and sort of look at it again with fresh eyes. And another thing that I was kind of obsessed with when I was a kid was those hooks that they have on the inside of stall doors in bathrooms where you're supposed to put your backpack or whatever? When I was a kid, I was always worried that if I put my backpack on there and then, I took my pants down and sat down, and that some hand was going to reach over and grab the backpack and somebody was going to run off with it. And then, what was I going to do? Chase after him? I don't even have any pants on. So I was always afraid that was going to happen. And as a result of that, I think years later, for reasons I can't entirely defend, I started writing a story about a kid whose backpack is stolen in an airport bathroom by a leprechaun. And so when I was going through some of my old stories later, I looked at them and I thought, well, these kind of go together, leprechauns and breakfast cereal and all that. So I combined those, and I combined some other stories that I had sitting around, and that was the reason why, because of all these stories I put together, I ended up with a book that has, for characters, 3 kids, a famous movie actor, a time-traveling scientist wizard, a Bigfoot who has to shave all of his hair so he'll look like a normal person, a rabbit man, a leprechaun, a cat with a unicorn horn, and a fire-breathing bird. And they became the main characters of Cold Cereal. As you can tell, I'm kind of a big nerd. Maybe you can't tell. Maybe you're looking at me and say, "No, really, Adam, big. You look like you really have it all together." And to which I say, "Wow, thank you. That's very nice. You didn't have to say that." But it's true. I'm a big nerd, and I'm happy I'm a big nerd. I love nerds. My wife is a nerd. She's an astrophysicist, actually. All the richest people in America are nerds. The President of the United States is a nerd. He's admitted that he used to love barbarian comic books, and it doesn't get a whole lot nerdier than that. So I'm a big nerd, and because of that, I read a lot of fantasy when I was a kid, and I think that's the reason why, I don't know if my kid self would have recognized Cold Cereal as fantasy, but it is. I had sort of a narrow view of fantasy when I was a kid, that it was all about like hobbits and sword and sorcery and that kind of thing. But bubbling beneath the surface of Cold Cereal is important stuff about King Arthur and Merlin and the Lady of the Lake and a colossal pink dragon that is threatening the world. And it's about brothers and sisters, and it's about yearning for an absent father, and it's about sitting alone at lunch, and it's about making new friends and discovering that you might be secretly amazing after all, even though it turns out you don't have any special magical powers. So that's Cold Cereal anyway, and if that's been enough of me talking about me, I'll go ahead and open the floor to questions. So let's see. From the Houston Library itself, I have the question, on the project, do you prefer to write, illustrate, or do everything all yourself? Lately, I don't really know why, but lately I've really preferred writing. I think it's because, and I don't want to give the impression that I think I'm so great at illustrating that I don't have anything more to learn. I hope I continue to keep getting better and better at it until the day I die. But I've been illustrating a lot longer. So I think when I start a project that I'm illustrating, I just have a lot more faith that it's going to turn out okay, that I'm going to see my way to the end of it. I'm going to be satisfied with it. And I'm not as worried as I am when I start writing, because whenever I sit down to write anything, I just feel like it's a tightrope walk, and this may be the time that I just plummet to my death. And so it's more exciting, it's more exhilarating, it's also harder, and so I think a lot of people think it's strange that I like the stuff that's harder, but it's also so much more thrilling when I feel like I've gotten it right. That said, I love illustrating my own projects. I love illustrating other people's projects if I really love the book. I've illustrated a lot of stuff from Mac Barnett, and he tends to write the kind of things that I read it and I curse myself that I didn't think of it first, and then I wish I had a time machine so I could go back in time and steal it from him. But barring an actual time machine, I figure the least I can do is maybe illustrate the thing. So I love illustrating projects that I didn't write if I really believe in the project, and if I have time. Increasingly I just don't have time to illustrate stuff. I'd also like to have the opportunity to write something and have somebody else illustrate it. I want to see what it's like being on the other side of the fence, and being able to work with some of the great illustrators that I love. So it's a little of everything. So let's see, a user there in the audience at the Houston Library asks, I love your Halloween storybooks. How did you come up with those, and will you be doing more in the future? So he or she is referring to my picture book, Frankenstein Makes a Sandwich, and then I had a follow-up to that, Frankenstein Takes the Cake. In fact, I have a scholastic edition of Frankenstein Takes the Cake right here. That's what that looks like. Those of you with keen eyes may have noticed the pumpkin head up on my bookshelf. That is actually a prop from Frankenstein Takes the Cake that I made out of paper mache and balloons and a bunch of other business. So I really liked writing those poems about monsters. They're basically all... The conceit of those books is that they are about monsters who have just kind of ordinary problems. Dracula has spinach stuck in his teeth. Frankenstein doesn't have any food in the house, so he tries to borrow some from the neighbors, but every time he approaches his neighbors' houses, they chase him off with torches and so forth. And I loved writing them, but after a couple of books, I sort of felt like I had gone to the well too many times, and I didn't know what else to say about monsters, so I don't know if I'm going to be making any more of them. I have sort of a collection on my laptop of some other poems that I've been writing, but they're not monster related. So I hope to put them all together and maybe put out another picture book of funny poems at some point in the future. But that picture book, if I write it, probably isn't going to have any overarching theme. They're not going to be all poems about monsters or spacemen or robots or whatever. It's probably going to be a little of everything. Let's see. A Houston Library patron asks, what was the collaboration with Neil Gaiman like for Tuesday? So Tuesday is, do I have that sitting around? Hold on. Here's an F and G for Tuesday, right here. This book doesn't actually come out until January, I want to say, but I'm very proud of it. It's written by Neil Gaiman. Of the Graveyard Book and of Sandman comics, and I was a big Neil Gaiman fan going way back. Here's a spread from Tuesday. Hope you can actually see that. So, it was great. I hope it's not too disappointing to tell you that Neil Gaiman and I didn't get like a beach house together for the summer and hammer this book out in each other's company. That's just not the way that these things tend to work. In fact, most of the time When authors and illustrators are paired together by their publisher, they often don't meet at all. They're encouraged not to talk to each other because the editor wants to be the person in the middle. She wants the author to tell her if he has any concerns, and then she'll tell the illustrator. Well, she'll tell the illustrator pretty much whatever she wants to at that point. My friend Mac Barnett talks about that game Telephone, that it's going around the room and you're supposed to whisper in your neighbor's ear, like, the robin has laid her eggs in the spring, and then the next kid says the robin has laid her eggs in the spring, and it's supposed to be that, like, when it gets to the other end of the room, it's turned into some crazy thing that doesn't even bear any resemblance to the original sentence. But you know how that thing works, right? It's not because it actually just changes a little bit each time. It's just because there's one kid in the class who listens to the robin laid her eggs in the spring, and then he turns to his neighbor and says, your mother is a vacuum cleaner. So that's how it gets screwed up. And Max says that those people grow up to be editors. So the editor she passes information back and forth, but if she doesn't really think the illustrator needs to hear this piece of information from the author, she won't pass it along, and vice versa. So, I talked to Neil on the phone a little bit, and we're friends online, but otherwise I got this great manuscript from him, and it was fun, and it meant that I got to paint a lot of animals and waistcoats and funny hats, and I always like painting animals and waistcoats and funny hats. So it was a pleasure to work on, and we're starting work on another one featuring the same panda character Chew as well. Let's see. Any more questions? It looks like there aren't any loaded up at the moment. So maybe I'll talk a little bit more about Tuesday. So Tuesday, the main character, this panda bear named Chew, when he sneezes, bad things happen. So the whole book is set at different locations, like the library. Maybe this looks like one of the Houston libraries. I hope so. This is like my dream library. That's what I wish they all look like, including like huge seats for elephants and tiny seats for snails and squirrels and so forth. So in Chew's day, Chew goes with his parents to the library, they go to the diner, they go to the circus, and every time that it seems like Chew is going to sneeze, he miraculously doesn't, until he does, and pandemonium ensues. See what I did there? I used the word panda in a word that means chaos and cataclysm. Pandemonium. So that's just one of the reasons why I'm a highly paid author of children's books. If I could team up with the writer, with any writer or with any illustrator, who would I team up with? Let's see, actually it's just, if you could team up as the writer with any illustrator, who would you team up with? What would you write about and why? So there's so many illustrators I would love to work with. I would love to have Carson Ellis illustrate something for me. She's currently illustrating some books of her husband's called Wildwood. I love her work. I would love to work with John Clausen, who was most recently of I Want My Hat Back fame, which is a great picture book. And probably my favorite picture book right now, Extra Yarn, is also illustrated by him and written by Mac Barnett. I would love to work with them. I'd love to work with Brian Biggs. It really depends on what the book would end up being, because I could write a book that just wouldn't be right for Brian Biggs or wouldn't be right for John Clausen. But I have a few picture book ideas right now that I would like somebody else to illustrate them. If I illustrate them myself, I'm probably not going to be able to get around to them for several years, so I'm kind of hoping that somebody else can do it for me in the meantime. And what would I write about? It could really be just about anything. I think the exciting thing for me would be to write a picture book and realize at the end of it, I could do this But you know who could really do this is Laurie Keller, or Matthew Myers, or any one of the illustrators who I admire, who I think could bring something to it that I couldn't. So that's what I'm hoping to do at some point in the future. A user at the Houston Library asks, do I always work in oil paints? So good eye, realizing that it's oils. A lot of people don't. Maybe because, especially in kids' books, oils just haven't been the most popular medium for kids' books. I think traditionally kids' books tend to be more water-based medium, not oil-based. And Tuesday is indeed entirely oil-painted, but I don't always work in oil paints. The cover to Cold Cereal, I hope it looks kind of like a traditional painting, but it was actually painted entirely on the computer. I use a kind of tablet that is made by the good people at Wacom. This is what it looks like here. And I use this with a special stylus, and then I am able to draw and paint, and this moves my cursor around on the screen in the same way that a mouse would. So I paint a lot digitally now, just because it happens to be a time saver, and it's nice too when you've gotten to the end of a painting and you realize that something should be different. It's so much easier to change things on the computer than it is to change an actual oil painting. And I get all those undo functions, so that's nice too. So I work a lot digitally. In Frankenstein Takes the Cake, I did a little of everything. The cover is oil painted. A lot of the interior pieces are digital. I did stuff with photo manipulation. Let's see. This one was just a pencil drawing. Here are some that were just pen and ink. So I do a little of everything. I tend to like to choose my medium based on what I think the book or the story really calls for, and go from there. The Houston Library user asks, you have a fantastic way of caricaturing animals and people. How did you learn to do this? That's a hard question to answer. I don't know. I mean, I start with a solid foundation, usually. Maybe that means photographs. Maybe that means models that I make. So when it comes to animals, I usually have to rely a lot on pictures that I find in Google image searches and that sort of thing. In the past, sometimes I've gone to the zoo and taken my own pictures, but of course, when you're at the zoo, you can't really count on the animals to cooperate, so you don't really end up getting the pictures that you want. So if I'm going to do an illustration of a panda bear, for example, I'll look up as many pictures as I can find of pandas, and I'll sort of load up my reference folder with those, but maybe I'll also get something like this. Here is a panda toy that I bought when I realized I was going to be working on Tuesday. And so this gives me a great model that I can look at from any angle. And then, of course, I have to stylize it. This panda does not work for every character. This panda does not look like this panda. But, that's the point where I get into my sketchbook and I do as many different drawings of pandas as I can, making the eyes bigger, making the ears smaller, changing the size of the nose, changing the whole shape of the head. There's 1,000 different ways I could draw a cute little panda bear, and so that's the point where I just have to draw as many different versions as I can and figure out which one works the best. Let's see if if this is the right sketchbook of mine, then maybe I can actually show you some of these. So I hope these are clear. Here's some pandas that I drew. On this one right here, I got really simplified. It's pretty much just circles. I drew a number of different versions. I drew images of the panda mom and the dad. And finally, I ended up with this little guy right here as being just my favorite version of all the pandas that I was drawing. If I'm working on something that I can't just go out and buy some great model that somebody has already made, I make my own models frequently. So the leprechaun character in Cold Cereal is named Mick. He's kind of a grumpy, caustic little old man. And so I made a model of him. And I just made this out of a clay called Sculpey. It's a clay that you can buy in any art supply store, and it bakes in a standard oven at home, so you don't need like an extra hot kiln or anything like that. So I baked him and I painted him up slightly, and then again I just had this model that I could look at from any angle for all the different drawings and paintings that I was going to do of Mick. So that's the foundation, and from there it's just, I guess it's just a lot of work, pushing and pulling the drawings in different directions and trying to find out which version looks the best. User comment, beautiful, thank you. I don't know if you're referring to the panda model, the bust of Mick, or just my general look and demeanor, but I thank you regardless of what it was. How has being an illustrator influenced your fiction writing? That's a good question. I don't know, because I really wish I could get inside the heads of other people and understand what they're thinking about when they're writing. When I'm writing, I think I get a fairly cohesive visual picture in my head. I'm playing a little movie of what I'm writing. It's not a perfect movie by any means, but it's maybe a little better than what the average person has. I don't know. I have to believe that a lifetime of art training has led me to have a better visual imagination than the average person. But again, without being able to just leap right into somebody else's head, I don't really know what they're thinking about. I don't know what somebody who can't draw a stick, is visualizing when they're writing their story. So I think being an illustrator gives me maybe a better than average ability to sort of visualize an entire scene at once and maybe pull up an image of various locations, and but regardless, it's an imperfect vision. And currently in Cold Cereal, I have like 9 main characters in the sequel to Cold Cereal, and I completely forget some of them exist for like 30 pages at a time. And I realize, oh man, I totally forgot about Finch Britain. What's Finch Britain doing right now? So then I have to go back and write somebody back in. Let's see. User comment, that's fantastic. Good. I don't even know to what that's pertaining, but excellent. If I'm doing anything that's fantastic, I hope I keep doing it. Any plans to combine the YA writing and the illustrating into a graphic novel for teens? And if so, what would it be? I'd love to do a graphic novel at some point. I don't know what it would be exactly. I do have a couple ideas for graphic novels, but they'd actually be for more for middle grade readers rather than young adults. So I don't know. I would love to do a graphic novel, but it is a tremendous amount of work. And it doesn't help that I'm a little more uptight about my art than some people are. I think I would have to develop a style that was a little more stylized, a little simpler, or else I could probably be working on the same graphic novel for like 4 years. And at this point in my career, I don't think any of my publishers are going to pay me enough of an advance for me to live off of for 4 years, so it would have to be a labor of love, and so I'd have to really come up with a story that I was desperate to tell, whether I was getting compensated for it or not. So I've I have an idea for a superhero story, but it feels like everybody's doing superhero stories, so I actually put that away for a while. I don't know what else I might write, but if I come up with a story at some point and it just feels like it needs to be told more visually than one of my standard novels, then I will do it as a graphic novel. I won't try to shoehorn an idea into a prose novel if a prose novel isn't going to serve it best. Let's see, another question. When you were illustrating Magic the Gathering cards, what were you most proud of? What's your favorite Magic the Gathering card? So that was a great, for those of you who aren't familiar with the game, Magic the Gathering is a collectible card game with sort of a fantasy bent, and working for Magic paid practically all of my bills for years and years while I was trying to break into kids' books. So I illustrated practically every fantasy subject possible: dragons and zombies and angels and knights and dwarves and hobbity things and so forth. I think my favorite Magic card maybe that I illustrated was one that I think is called Novice Griffin Rider. It's an image of a young woman holding a saddle, and she's sort of posing in front of her griffin, her enormous half lion, half eagle that she rides around. And that one, just everything turned out right on that one. I did a little bit of research into eagles, and I came up with this particular kind of eagle that it's called a harpy eagle. Look it up if you have a chance. The harpy eagle has this big, I don't know what the term for it is. I'm going to say it's a foof. Has this foof of feathers around its head that kind of looks like a lion's mane. And so this foof made it the perfect eagle to turn into a griffin, in my opinion. So that was kind of gratifying, being able to run across sort of the perfect reference point. So yeah, I really liked working for Magic the Gathering, but I don't do them anymore because what I really wanted to do was kids' books, and those take up all of my time. So I've kind of left that part of my career behind. Any advice for aspiring writers or illustrators? So it's easiest for me to give advice to illustrators, I think, because I started out as an illustrator. I got my first work as an illustrator, and illustration was kind of my back door into writing. So, back in the early to mid 90s, I was going out to the San Diego Comic Convention every year, and I was showing my work around. And that was a lot of fun, and I met a lot of people, and eventually, I think on the second or third year, it started paying off. I managed to start getting a few commissions from role-playing game companies and trading card game companies to do paintings for their stuff. I also wanted to do comics, but I never really got into the comics industry in any huge way. But so one of the pieces of advice that I always give illustrators is try to figure out if there is a place where you can go and actually meet people who are in the power to give you work face-to-face and shake their hand. I don't know if it's pheromonal or what it is, but I think if you actually meet people face-to-face, they are far more predisposed to actually hire you afterwards than people would be otherwise if you were just sending stuff cold through the mail to them. So in my case, that ended up being the San Diego Comic-Con, but of course the SCBWI, or the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, they hold conferences all the time that have art directors and editors at them, so you get a chance to mingle with those people at those events. And so I would suggest any illustrator or writer end up joining the SCBWI if you want to write for kids. Meeting people face to face, shaking hands, keeping good records. I made it as easy as possible for people to comment on my work. If I sent them some samples in the mail, I would always include a return postcard already stamped and addressed, with just boxes to check off that said, I like your work, I will keep it on file. Please update me when you have new work. Your work does not suit our needs at this time. And so all they had to do was just pull that out, check off a box, throw it back into their outgoing mail, and I got a lot more responses that way. I think this is probably still a good way to go because I don't think publishers are too crazy about you just sending huge emails with big attachments to them. But I don't know. It's hard for me to say because I'm not trying to get into the industry anymore, and people didn't really use email that way when I was. So I guess I would suggest you talk to somebody a little younger than me. But I hope that answers your question. As far as writing goes, I really think you ought to court agents rather than publishers. If you don't illustrate, then I really think finding the agent who's right for you is the way to go. And you can go to websites like Agent Query to look up information about agents. And you can also meet agents, again, at SCBWI conferences and so forth. It turns out that illustrators have sort of a leg up on writers, that if an editor decides that she likes your illustration work, she's usually all too happy to look at samples of your writing if you have any. But she receives way too many unsolicited samples of writing for her to look at all of them and really give each one of them the attention it deserves. So that's what a good agent is for. The good agent is that gatekeeper that has already decided this person's work is worth looking at, and the editor respects that agent and will pay attention if he or she thinks that the editor needs to look at this or that. What have your experiences been with rejection when trying to get published? I have written 6, 7, maybe 8 picture books that never got published, and I'm pretty sure never will. I say never will because with maybe the exception of one of them, I don't think any of them are good enough to even bother trying again now that I've got my foot in the door. And so these were cases that a lot of times I wrote the picture book. I also made up a full dummy of drawings of all the illustrations. Do I have any of those sitting around? Let me see. Here's a dummy that I made for my very first picture book, The Dirty Cowboy, which was written by Amy Timberlake. This one actually did get published. But this was just the working copy that I made to show the editor what I was planning. So it has just a computer-colored photocopy on the front of it. On the inside, it has copies of drawings. And the whole book is just black and white drawings in this fashion. With all of the type set in the place that I thought it should be set, on the page that I thought it should be placed. And so when I was starting out, I made these all the time. I made these kinds of things for books that never got published, and I was sending those out. Sometimes I was just sending out manuscripts. And like I said, a lot of them just came back with, you know, this is nice, but it doesn't really suit our needs. I got a lot of comments in the mid-90s saying that, like, if you had sent this to me 5 or 10 years ago, I would have published it, but money's a little tighter right now, so, you know, sorry, kid. And so that's the way it was for several years. Eventually, I broke into kids' magazines before I broke into kids' books. So I did a lot of illustrations for Cricket, Spider, Cicada, pretty much any magazine named after a bug. I worked for it at some point. And so that, you know, it didn't pay a lot, but it paid me a little bit to sort of refresh my portfolio every now and then. And then I kept showing that new work to publishers, and eventually it's that magazine work that led directly to my first kids book, The Dirty Cowboy. It wasn't the work that I had in my portfolio, you know, before I started getting that magazine work. That's something else I tell illustrators a lot. Aim low. Regardless of how many inspirational posters out there with eagles on them tell you to aim high, aim low. Shoot for the knees. Somebody out there has lower standards, and that person will hire you. And then you can do great work for that person, and that work will get you the work that you want. Um, so I've had my share of rejection, but I think I'm in a good position now where I'm in a weird position now where I'm starting to get the impression that, if I write something, somebody's probably going to want to publish it just because, well, this guy's sold some books before, so maybe he'll sell this book. I hope that's not the case, but I know, world's tiniest violin and all that, but I'm in the weird position now of hoping that everything that I'm getting published is getting published on its own merits and not just because the marketing department has crunched the numbers and decided that the next Adam Rex book will move 30,000 copies, so therefore, green light. I don't know. This is Banned Books Week. What are your experiences with banning or your opinions on the topic? I have more experiences with banning than I wish I did. The Dirty Cowboy has been banned a couple of times, most recently in a school district in Pennsylvania. That was luckily a very public banning. And I say luckily because I think anytime a book is banned, anytime someone decides on behalf of an entire community that the children of that community shouldn't see that book, the community has a right to know that this is being done in their name. And that's not always the case. So this school librarian was set upon by a particular family, and they demanded that the Dirty Cowboy be removed. She fought them on this. She is my hero. But they went over her head, and eventually the school board voted and decided unanimously that the book should be removed from all of the schools in this district. I have mixed feelings about this because whenever a book is banned in this fashion, it only causes more people to end up looking at the book than they would otherwise. My book was one among thousands in this area, and chances are maybe 1 or 2 people per year were looking at it until they banned it, and then suddenly hundreds of people wanted to look at it. The local news station was doing stories about it, the local newspaper covered it, and you get this Streisand effect where as soon as you tell somebody not to look at something, it just makes everybody want to look at the thing to figure out why they don't want you to look at it. That said, and as much as people pat you on the back and say, way to go, you got a book banned, it hurts. I got into this industry not just because I like telling stories and because I like illustrating, but because I want to make great books for kids. And people who want to ban my book are telling me that I am doing something to hurt children. And that just stinks. And so I can't stress that enough. The next time you hear about somebody who has got his book banned, shake his hand. Okay, go ahead and do that. But also, give him a shoulder to cry on too, because it doesn't feel good, or it doesn't feel good to me anyway. So anyway, I definitely respect the right of any and all parents to monitor what their child reads and decide on behalf of their own child if a book is not right for them. I just don't think that 1 or 2 angry parents has the right to decide that everybody's kid doesn't get to look at that thing. And when that happens, people ought to know about it. Next question. What would be your dream picture book assignment? I don't know. I think my dream picture book assignment at this point, it would be one of 2 things. It would either be that I get to write a book that is then illustrated by one of my idols, one of my illustration idols, or maybe it's that a book comes along by someone with whom I've always wanted to work my whole life, some author, which was the case with Tuesday. Neil Gaiman was always one of a number of people that I kept in a list in my head, just my little short list of, if this person ever comes calling, it doesn't matter how busy I am, I got to figure out a way to work on that project. So I got to work with one of my dream authors already, and I have others. I don't know if David Sedaris ever wants to write a kid's book. I'm on board for that. There's a lot of authors I would love to work with. Some of them outside of the kids book industry, but I guess those would be my dream projects at this point, because when it comes to just writing my own book and illustrating it myself, again, I'm in sort of the position where I can make that happen usually now. So if I have a dream project in which I want to write it and illustrate it, I probably get to do that. What projects are you working on now or next, and when will they be out? So once again, Tuesday will be out in January. That book is done. I'm working on the sequel to Cold Cereal right now. I've already written it. It's called Unlucky Charms, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour. And it will be out in February, assuming that I actually get all the illustrations done. The cover's finished. A couple of the illustrations on the interior are done, but I have a lot more work to do. On top of that, I'm illustrating one of my own picture book manuscripts called Moon Day, which is about a girl who wakes up to find that the moon is in her backyard one morning, and sees what happens to the town when the day doesn't start as it usually does, and the sun doesn't rise, and everybody has to shuffle around in a dark town, going to work and falling asleep at their desks and so forth. I'm illustrating that right now. I actually wrote that, or at least I started writing that like 15 years ago or something ridiculous like that. It just, when I first started writing it, it wasn't right, so I rewrote it, and I rewrote it, and I rewrote it, and I don't even know how many drafts I'm on at this point. But eventually I decided, okay, maybe it still isn't perfect, but I don't think I'm smart enough to make it any better than it is. So I'm happy with it now, and I'm illustrating it, and I don't know when that'll come out. Sometime next year, probably fall of next year. What else? I'm actually going to be doing another picture book with Neil Gaiman, as I mentioned, but that one's just getting underway. And I'm under contract to do a couple other books as well. Another picture book of mine, another picture book with Mac Barnett. So I kind of know what I'm going to be working on for the next few years. After Unlucky Charms is finished, I'm going to have to do the third book of the Cold Cereal trilogy, which I've just started writing, but has a long way to go. Let's see. Who are some of your illustration heroes? Previously mentioned people like Carson Ellis, John Clausen, Brian Biggs I love. I'm really getting into Greg Pizzoli now. He's got, I think, his first picture book coming out pretty soon. I love Lane Smith. I would love to be able to work with him. Lane Smith and John Sheska are almost by themselves responsible for me getting into this industry in the first place, because I worked in a bookstore when I was a teenager and kind of fell in love with picture books all over again. I hadn't looked at picture books for a long time because I hadn't been a kid in a long time, but I started looking at all the books that were being published at the end of the 80s and in the early 90s, and that was a kind of golden age of picture books. And so John and Lane's books like The Stinky Cheese Man and The True Story of the Three Little Pigs were very influential to me. William Joyce's work as well. So these were the guys that made me want to be a picture book author and illustrator in the first place. Let's see, anything else? Looks like we're getting close to the end. I don't see any more questions. So I'll give another couple of minutes and see if any more trickle in. Any closing remarks? I'm glad you brought up Banned Books Week. I think, go to the website of the Bookseller Association Against Censorship and look at the books that they've been defending lately. Go to the ACLU website. Go find out what books are being challenged, and go to your library and ask for those books, or pick up a copy at your bookstore, and then tell the authors about it, because you can be sure that the people who are actually banning the books are often gleefully telling the authors that they've done that. In a case when apparently Fat Vampire was removed from a particular school because one father decided that it wasn't appropriate for his 14-year-old daughter. I didn't find out about that through the ACLU or through a news story. I found out because the father wrote me an email, and told me, with no small amount of obvious pleasure in the tone of his writing, that he had gotten this removed, and that the books that I wrote were filth, and that in the future would I please keep them out of the schools, as though I actually had any say whether or not the schools have my books or not. All he can really ask me to do is stop writing, and I'm not going to do that. So I guess that'll do as far as closing remarks go. One final question. What do you think is the most important aspect of making a picture book? Picture books are really their own thing. They're not simply short stories. They're not comics. They're like just an absolutely original art form, a very American art form, and so I think it's that perfect synthesis of art and writing that you really want to go for in a picture book, in the same way that you really do want to go for it in a perfect comic as well. You never want to see a picture book that says in the text he ate breakfast that morning, with a picture of somebody eating breakfast that morning, and then another bit of text saying then he went outside, with a picture of him stepping outside. It's redundant. The only reason that you would want to ever do that is if you wanted to sort of reinforce the mundanity, the sort of boringness of that person's daily routine, maybe. But I think the best picture books, they involve a little bit of a surprise, kind of a tickle in your brain, where the art and the writing, they mesh together perfectly, but each one is building off of the other. Maybe sometimes the art is in fact showing you something that the text isn't even describing. Maybe it's showing you the exact opposite, so that you realize, hey, I can't trust this book, and that's kind of fun. A great picture book, I think, is really something where you could not appreciate the text by itself, and you couldn't appreciate the art by itself, but then it comes together in this perfect alchemy of great storytelling that I think frankly has no upper age limit. I don't know why it is that anybody should ever feel like they have outgrown a great short story told directly with images and words. Why is that something that we grow out of? Why is it that kids are being told nowadays by their parents that, you're 8 years old now, you shouldn't be looking at these things anymore, you should be reading novels? I love picture books. We don't have any kids yet, and I have a collection of some 250, maybe 300 of them. So I don't think they have an expiration date. And let's see, one more comment. It says, thank you so much. It was fantastic to ask you some questions. Thank you for asking them. Thank you for having an interest, and it has been my pleasure to talk with you guys on behalf of the Houston Public Library. I think it's great that they do this. I hope you'll check out some of the other videos from the other authors. I hope you won't check out the very short videos that I recorded yesterday, in which I'm mostly just whistling show tunes to find out if my camera and microphone work. So I'm expressly asking you not to look at those, but I hope you'll tell your friends about this one. So once again, thanks a lot. Been great talking to you.